On the night of the 11th of June, 2026, the day the World Cup opened, two numbers were spoken into the world that cannot both be true at the same time. One number was published by FIFA. The other number was visible to anyone watching the broadcast. The FIFA number described a stadium full of paying supporters. The broadcast number, the one your own eyes counted as the cameras cut to wide shots of the Estadio Akron in Guadalajara, showed entire blocks of empty seats. Entire sections. Not a few scattered gaps. Not a slow trickle of latecomers. Blocks. And tonight I am going to walk you through, step by step, exactly how the BBC analysis editor Ross Atkins caught FIFA's communications team in a contradiction that has now become the defining cover-up of the opening weekend. By the end of this video, you will see exactly how the lie was constructed, exactly which sentence in the official statement contradicted itself, and exactly why this matters more than any scoreline in any match. Stay with me, because the cameras, not the press releases, are going to decide which version of this World Cup goes into the historical record, and the cameras, in the first 72 hours of the tournament, have already decided. Sit with that for a moment. Let me lay out the timeline in plain language. On the opening weekend, multiple host venues, including the Estadio Akron in Guadalajara for the South Korea against Czech Republic match, the venue in Atlanta for the warm-up matches, and the venue in Mexico City for the ceremony-adjacent fixtures, broadcast images that showed visibly under-occupied stadiums. The images circulated online within hours. Supporter groups from multiple countries posted side-by-side comparisons of the official attendance figures against the broadcast footage. The Football Supporters Europe organization, which represents fan groups across the continent, issued a statement raising concerns about ticket access, distribution, and the gap between announced attendance and visible attendance. And then, within 48 hours, the BBC assigned Ross Atkins, the network's analysis editor, to the story. Now understand what that assignment signals. The BBC does not assign Ross Atkins to a story unless the editorial leadership has decided the story deserves the network's most rigorous explanatory journalism. Ross Atkins is the BBC's deep dive analyst. His videos break down complex public interest stories using primary documents, side-by-side comparisons, and forensic source citation. Putting his name on the FIFA story is not a sports decision. It is a public interest decision, which means the BBC is no longer treating the empty stadiums of 2026 as a sports footnote. The BBC is treating them as a story about institutional honesty. The Atkins investigation, as reported by the BBC and corroborated by multiple supporter organizations, identified three core contradictions in the FIFA opening weekend communications. The first contradiction was in the attendance numbers themselves. The official figures provided by the host broadcaster and reported through FIFA channels described venues as substantially full. The broadcast footage, when frame-checked against the published attendance numbers, did not support those claims. The second contradiction was in the FIFA explanation for the visible gaps. FIFA initially attributed the empty seats to late arrival of supporters at security checks. That explanation was tested against the broadcast timeline. The broadcast images showed empty seats not just at kickoff, but well into the second half. Late arrival does not explain second half emptiness. The third contradiction was in the ticket allocation data. According to the supporter organization reporting and the Financial Times coverage of the dynamic pricing model, ticket prices for the marquee opening weekend matches reached levels that excluded the typical traveling supporter base. Tickets at face value of more than $2,700 in the secondary market on opening weekend are not a market clearing at full capacity. They are a market that has priced its own customers out. Here is the part that should make your jaw drop. Within 48 hours of the opening weekend, the secondary ticket markets collapsed. Tickets that had been listed for $1,000 dropped to $400. Tickets at $400 dropped to $180. Some marquee match tickets were available below the original face value within 72 hours of the opening weekend. That is not the behavior of a market with genuine demand. That is the behavior of a market in which speculators bought inventory at high prices, planned to flip it, discovered no buyers existed at those prices, and panicked. The scalpers, who normally drive prices up around major events, were this time the ones holding the bag. And the people they were trying to sell to, the ordinary fans, were watching from home, knowing exactly why the seats they could now afford had been priced beyond their reach for the previous 6 months. There is a deeper story inside the resale collapse. The fans who were locked out of the original sale by the dynamic pricing model are the same fans who would have filled those seats with the noise, the songs, the flags, the chaos, that turn a stadium into a stage. Football atmosphere is not produced by corporate executives sipping wine in a suite. Football atmosphere is produced by the working-class supporters from Manchester, from Buenos Aires, from Lagos, from Mumbai, from Karachi, from Casablanca, who travel in groups, share rooms 3 to a bed, eat instant noodles in the corridor, and produce 90 minutes of unbroken sound. FIFA priced those fans out. Then, FIFA acted surprised when the atmosphere disappeared. The atmosphere did not disappear. It was evicted, and there is a second-order effect that nobody at FIFA seems willing to discuss in public. Broadcasters pay billions for these tournaments on the assumption that the visuals will be cinematic. The wide shots will swell, the crowd will surge, the faces in the stands will sell the product on the screen. When the broadcaster cuts to a wide shot and finds entire blocks of empty seats, the advertising value of that broadcast slot quietly depreciates. The 30-second ad that ran in the second half cost the brand the same money it would have cost in a full stadium, but the brand was attached, on screen, to a tournament that visibly was not what it had been sold as. Sponsorship contracts have clauses for this. Quiet renegotiations begin. Future deals get harder, and FIFA, which lives or dies by the next television cycle, has now made the next negotiation measurably harder for itself in front of a global audience. Let us also talk about who actually loses money in this scenario, because that question is rarely asked in plain language. The scalpers lose, in the short term. The brokers who bought inventory on the assumption of a flip lose. But scalpers, historically, are paid by the spread, not by the ticket. They will not be the ones whose business collapses. The corporate buyers who allocated tickets as client entertainment will lose, but they will write the cost off as marketing. The party that loses most, and least visibly, is the local economy around each host city. Restaurant bookings missed, hotel rooms that flipped to last-minute discount rates, taxi drivers who waited at the airport for fans who never came, vendors who stocked merchandise for a crowd that did not materialize. The host cities of 2026, which were sold the World Cup as an economic boom, are now adding up the difference between projection and reality, and the difference is not small. FIFA collects the broadcast rights. The local economies are left with a tab. And this is where the BBC investigation gets uncomfortable for FIFA in a second, harder way. Ross Atkins is not an accident. The BBC's editorial decision to assign him to this World Cup is itself a story. The BBC has been criticized in the past for treating FIFA scandals as sports stories. Putting the analysis editor on the case reframes the story as a public interest investigation. That reframing is contagious. Other outlets follow it. The Financial Times reporting on dynamic pricing fed the BBC's questions. The BBC's questions feed the Politico reporting on visa issues. The Politico reporting feeds the New York Times reporting on the Trump-Infantino relationship. The Times reporting feeds the Yahoo Sports coverage of the criminal complaint against the FIFA president. Every outlet's coverage strengthens every other outlet's coverage. FIFA is being investigated, in slow motion, by an emergent journalistic consensus, and the empty seats in Guadalajara are now part of the prosecution file in the court of public opinion. Now let me be fair to FIFA, because honesty requires it. The strongest version of the FIFA defense on the attendance issue is that announced attendance figures at major sporting events are, historically, often based on tickets distributed rather than seats occupied. That is a real industry practice. The Premier League uses it. The NFL uses it. UEFA tournaments use it. By that standard, a stadium can be announced as sold out even if every ticket holder did not arrive, because the ticket holders paid for the seats whether they sat in them or not. That defense is internally coherent. That defense is also the defense that journalism is no longer willing to accept at face value, because here is the demolition. The FIFA communications on the opening weekend did not present the numbers as tickets distributed. They presented the numbers as attendance. Those are different concepts. The conflation of those concepts is the lie that the BBC investigation has surfaced. A press release that says 98% attendance when 98% of tickets were distributed but visible occupancy was substantially lower is a press release that has chosen a misleading framing over an accurate one. The framing matters. The framing is where the deception lives. There is also the question of what FIFA actually expected to happen. The dynamic pricing model, the variable rate tickets that adjust upward in response to demand signals, is a model imported from American professional sports and from the music industry. It is a model designed to extract the maximum revenue from each individual buyer. It is not a model designed to fill a stadium with the traditional traveling supporter base of international football. FIFA, in adopting this model for the 2026 tournament, made a choice. The choice was to maximize per-ticket revenue at the expense of guaranteed full occupancy. That is a defensible commercial choice. But it is not a choice that can coexist with a public communication strategy that promises full stadiums. You can have the revenue model, or you can have the attendance narrative. You cannot have both. And FIFA, in the first week of the tournament, tried to have both, and the cameras caught the contradiction. The pattern of fan exclusion across the tournament reveals something deeper than a one-weekend communications failure. The supporter base of international football is being systematically priced out of the experience of attending international football. The fans who built the global culture of the sport through 50 years of attendance, songwriting, choreographed flag displays, and unbroken vocal support are now economically excluded from the events those same fans made culturally valuable in the first place. The corporate hospitality boxes are full. The premium tier suites are full. The general admission sections that historically produce the cinematic atmosphere are visibly underoccupied. The tournament is, in 2026, becoming a private event with public broadcasting. The contradiction between the private event reality and the public broadcasting framing is the contradiction the BBC investigation has just exposed. What does this mean for the next 24 hours of the tournament? FIFA's communications team is now in a position where every subsequent attendance announcement will be scrutinized by the BBC, the Financial Times, Politico, Reuters, Al Jazeera, and the supporter organizations that have built their own data tracking pipelines. The press release era is over. The forensic verification era has begun. Every claim FIFA makes for the rest of the tournament will be checked frame by frame against the broadcast footage. And the moment a second discrepancy surfaces, the cumulative case becomes much harder to dismiss as a one-off. There is also the matter of the 2030 and 2034 bids. The Spain, Portugal, and Morocco tournament of 2030 is already drawing analysis from federations watching how 2026 unfolds. The Saudi Arabia tournament of 2034 is being scrutinized more harshly than any host nation in living memory. Every empty seat in Guadalajara, every misleading attendance figure, every ticket price scandal in 2026 adds weight to the case that FIFA's host selection process has become a luxury auction rather than a sporting decision. And weight, in international football politics, eventually becomes votes. And consider what is happening inside the federations themselves right now. The presidents of the South American Confederation, the African Confederation, the Asian Confederation are receiving private briefings from their national associations about what happened in Guadalajara, in Mexico City, in Atlanta. The briefings are not the polite summaries that get presented at the next official Congress. They are blunt assessments of fan exclusion, atmosphere collapse, and reputational risk. The presidents are taking notes. The presidents are making phone calls. The presidents are quietly aligning ahead of the 2027 FIFA presidential election around a position that has not yet been spoken aloud. The position is that the empty seat in Guadalajara is not a Mexican problem. It is a FIFA problem. And FIFA problems in election cycles become FIFA president problems. Empty seats are not the embarrassment. They are the omen. They are the body language of a tournament that lost touch with the people it claims to belong to. Body language never lies. A statement can be drafted. A press release can be edited. A spokesperson can be coached. But the way a stadium looks at kickoff, the way the cameras find the gaps, the way the broadcast director nervously cuts away from the wide shot, that is involuntary. That is the truth that escapes through the cracks of every prepared script. And once a tournament starts producing that kind of body language in the first week, the rest of the tournament does not recover its credibility. It only learns to hide more carefully. The cameras adjust, the angles narrow, the cuts get faster. But the audience watching at home has already seen what was beneath the polish. And the audience does not forget. Football is the most democratic of sports. It is the cheapest to play, the cheapest to watch. The only equipment is a ball, and not even a real one, in most of the world. And when the highest competition in the sport becomes the most expensive ticket in the world, the contradiction is not a marketing problem. It is an identity crisis. The grandmothers who saved for a year to watch their grandchildren play in the streets of Lagos do not save for a year to be told the seats at the World Cup are not for them. They watch on television. And FIFA, which built its empire on the television contracts of those same households, has now alienated the very base that funds its existence. There is one more dimension to this story that the casual viewer needs to understand. The The data tracking pipelines built by independent supporter organizations and by academic researchers in the field of sport management have, over the last 5 years, become significantly more sophisticated. Researchers at multiple universities in Europe and North America have published open-source tools that allow any analyst to extract, frame by frame, the visible occupancy rate of a televised stadium and compare it against the published attendance figure. Those tools did not exist a decade ago. The previous era of FIFA communications, in which a press release was the final word on attendance, ended quietly while nobody was paying attention. In 2026, FIFA is operating under the old assumption that a press release is final, while the analytical infrastructure outside FIFA is operating under a new assumption that every press release is testable against forensic visual evidence. The gap between those two assumptions is the gap that the BBC investigation just stepped into, and it is the gap that every subsequent investigation will continue to widen. Think about what this means for the next press release FIFA issues. The communications team is now operating in an environment where every claim is going to be tested by independent researchers within hours of publication. The forensic analysts are not waiting for the next press cycle. They are running their tools live. They are publishing their results in real time. They are seeding their findings to journalists who are now on heightened alert. The communications team can no longer rely on the old trick of letting a discrepancy fade into the news cycle of the following week, because the next news cycle now begins the moment the press release lands. The latency that used to protect institutional communications has collapsed. FIFA has not yet adjusted its communications strategy to this new latency reality, and every day it does not adjust, the credibility deficit compounds. And here is a piece of context that almost nobody outside the football industry has paused to consider. The next FIFA broadcast cycle is being negotiated in the same window that this tournament is being scrutinized. Every empty seat captured on a broadcast wide shot is, in effect, a negotiating data point in the next broadcaster's pricing model. The broadcasters are watching this tournament the way a property valuer watches a neighborhood. They are noting the wear, the cracks, the moments the institution looked unsteady. They are building those moments into the discount they will demand at the next contract signing. The empty seats are not just a public relations problem for FIFA. The empty seats are a measurable dollar-denominated future revenue loss that has just been entered into the calculation of every broadcasting executive whose signature FIFA will need in the coming negotiating cycle. And let me close on the historical comparison that deserves to be on the table. In the World Cup of 2010 in South Africa, the South African organizers were criticized in some early matches for visible empty seats, but the explanation was logistical, with transportation difficulties for the local supporter base. In the World Cup of 2014 in Brazil, the visible occupancy at certain inland venues was lower than expected, but the explanation was distance from the major population centers. In the World Cup of 2018 in Russia, the occupancy was higher than expected, in part because the host nation subsidized ticket distribution to its own supporter base. In the World Cup of 2022 in Qatar, the visible occupancy was managed by the very small number of venues clustered in a single metropolitan area. None of those previous tournaments produced the structural pattern that 2026 has produced in the first weekend. None of those tournaments had a pricing model that systematically excluded the traveling international supporter base. None of those tournaments produced a secondary market that collapsed by more than 70% in 72 hours. The historical record, in other words, does not contain a precedent for what just happened, which is why the BBC investigation is not a routine sports story. It is a story without a precedent, and stories without a precedent become the precedent for everything that follows. So tell me, in the comments, one word. Lie or truth? Did FIFA lie about Guadalajara? Or did the cameras show us something else entirely? I read every comment on this channel personally, and I pinned the most thoughtful answer at the top of every video. Drop your country flag next to your answer, because I want to see in real time where the trust has broken and where it is still holding. And if you saw the empty seats with your own eyes, on your own television, in your own living room, the day the World Cup opened, write the name of the city you were watching from in the comment. Because the more places that admit they saw the same thing at the same moment, the harder it becomes for any press release in the world to argue the opposite. And if you want the deep investigation into the criminal complaint filed against Gianni Infantino, the one that landed in a Swiss prosecutor's inbox 2 days before the opening match, the one almost nobody is reporting, that expose is already up on this channel. Watch it next. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next video, where we break down the visa scandal, the Iran controversy, and the photograph from the Oval Office that FIFA does not want you to see in full context. Ring the bell. Share this video with one person who still believes the attendance numbers FIFA is publishing. The more people who can read a press release the way it was written to be read, the harder it becomes for FIFA to keep writing them this way.